The lantern beam cut through the freezing fog at 1:45 a.m. On February 13, 1891, in the labyrinth of Blackthorn End, London's most forsaken district, Police Constable Elias Thorne turned his light into the shadowed railway arch at Raven's Passage and froze. There she lay, Eleanor Voss' throat slashed in 3 brutal cuts, blood still spreading across the wet stones like spilled ink. Her eyes, one still twitching open and shut, as if fighting death itself, locked onto him for a final horrifying second. Elias heard footsteps retreating into the darkness, calm, unhurried. He wanted to chase regulations, demanded he stay. By the time help arrived, those footsteps had vanished into the endless maze of alleys, leaving only the echo of something that felt wrong. Eleanor Voss was no ordinary victim. At 31, she had lived 2 lives in the suffocating poverty of Blackthorn. By day, she told her aging father in the workhouse. She was a respectable bottle stopper at a chemist's shop. Every Friday, she crossed the river with small gifts, smiling sweetly, attending church like a dutiful daughter. But at night, in the gaslit hell of Flower Lane and Thorn Street, she was known as Scarlet Nell, a streetwalker surviving in the 4-pence lodging houses where despair clung thicker than the fog. The discovery sent shockwaves through a district still bleeding from unsolved horrors 3 years earlier. Whispers spread instantly. He has returned, the same railway arches, the same brutal throat cuts, the same feeling of being watched by something ancient and patient. But this time was different, no frenzied mutilation. Just 3 precise cuts and a black crepe hat lying neatly beside her, bought only hours earlier with a sailor's money. As Elias stood guard over her dying body, he noticed something that made his skin crawl: faint scratches on the brick wall. Above her, fresh marks that looked like numbers or symbols, glowing faintly before fading into the stone. The hunt began, but the shadow that took Eleanor was only just beginning its game. Eleanor Voss was born in 1859 in the cramped rooms of Bermondsey, daughter of a bootmaker and an Irish immigrant mother. Poverty crushed the family early. Her father entered the workhouse when she was barely a teenager and young. Eleanor spent terrifying months inside those cold walls with him, an experience that scarred her forever. By 1880, she had drifted into Blackthorn, and drawn by the promise of work that quickly turned to survival on the streets. She lived in the notorious lodging houses of Flower Lane, where beds were little more than wooden shelves, shared with strangers, lice, and despair. To her father, she remained the respectable daughter who sealed medicine bottles to the streets. She was Scarlet Nell, sharp-tongued, heavy drinking, moving between names and addresses to dodge debts and danger. The winter of 1891 found her at her lowest, destitute, often turned out into the freezing night when she couldn't pay for a bed. On February 11th, she reconnected with Thomas Slade, a rough merchant sailor, recently returned with wages in his pocket. They drank heavily. He bought her the black crepe hat, a small luxury that made her feel almost human again. But something stalked them that night. Witnesses later spoke of a tall man in a flat-peaked cap who seemed to appear wherever they went. He never approached directly. He simply watched at one public house, glasses shattered without being touched, when he passed in the lodging house kitchen where Eleanor tried to sleep on a bench. The fire died suddenly, despite fresh coal. Twist came at midnight on the 13th. Eleanor was thrown out for non-payment. On Commercial Street, she met another woman who warned her about the man in the cheese-cutter cap, the same figure, who had just struck her. Eleanor, desperate and cold, still went with him toward the Minories. What happened in those 30 minutes between Commercial Street and Raven's Passage remains the greatest horror. No screams were heard, only the calm footsteps. Elias later chased when they found her. The new hat sat perfectly placed beside her body, as if the killer wanted everyone to know she had enjoyed one final moment of beauty before the shadows claimed her. The investigation exploded. Superintendent Harlan Crowe took charge, still haunted by the unsolved killings of 1888. Thomas Slade was arrested quickly, the obvious suspect. He had been seen with Eleanor, had argued with her, and was found drunk and injured the next morning. But the evidence twisted in impossible ways. Slade's knife, sold hours after the murder, was completely clean. Medical examiner Dr. Victor Lang, who had examined the previous victims, declared the wounds showed unnatural precision and control, impossible for a drunken sailor. These cuts were made by something that enjoys the act, he whispered during the inquest. Then came the first major shock. Ellen Kane, the last person to see Eleanor alive, gave a chilling statement. The man in the peaked cap hadn't just struck her. When he turned toward Eleanor, his eyes seemed completely black under the gaslight. like holes burned through a mask. She said she swore she saw him smile too wide to knowing. As officers searched the lodging houses, they found something terrifying. In the exact bed Eleanor had used days earlier, someone had scratched the same strange symbols found near her body into the wooden frame. The deputy swore no one had entered that room. Elias Thorne, the young constable, began having nightmares. In them, he stood in the arch again, but this time Eleanor's. I kept opening and closing, revealing not pain, but something ancient looking back at him through her. The biggest twist came during the inquest. A witness who had been hiding in the arches that night claimed he saw not one man but two figures standing over Eleanor, one in the peaked cap, the other taller, unnaturally still, as if made of shadow itself. The second figure had no face. The case against Slade collapsed. He was released, but not before screaming in court that something followed us that night, something that had been following her 4 weeks. The file should have closed instead. The horror was only awakening. The shadows did not stop with Eleanor. Weeks after her funeral, attended by thousands, gripped by renewed terror, strange reports flooded and women in Blackthorn claimed to see a man in a peaked cap watching them from alleys, only for him to vanish when approached. Lodging house fires died without reason. Scratched symbols appeared on walls. Elias Thorne became obsessed. He returned to Raven's Passage night after night. One evening he found fresh blood, not human, and the symbols glowing again in his pocket. He later discovered Eleanor's black crepe hat. He had never touched it. The final shocking twist came from Eleanor's father. In his last days in the workhouse, he confessed to a priest that during her Friday visits, Eleanor sometimes seemed different. Her shadow would move a second too late. Once he swore her eyes turned completely black when she thought he wasn't looking. Dr. Lang made a final horrifying note in his private journal. Later discovered the precision of the cuts matches nothing human. It is as if the blade was guided by something that has done this for centuries. Thomas Slade died 2 years later, found with his throat cut in the same style, but this time the symbols were carved deeply into his chest. The killer had returned to finish what it started. Elias Thorne was transferred out of Blackthorn. On his last night, he stood in the arch. One final time, he heard the footsteps again, not retreating this time, but approaching slowly from behind. He never reported what he saw. He simply walked away, resigned from the force months later, and was found dead in 1900. In the same streets, throat-cut symbols carved beside him. The case remains officially unsolved, but those who walk Blackthorn's alleys at night still report seeing a woman in a black crepe hat standing silently near the railway arch, waiting for company. Some say the shadow that took Eleanor Voss never left it, simply learned to wear many faces. The true horror of Eleanor Voss's death was not in how she died, but in what she revealed about Blackthorn itself. Decades later, researchers discovered that the symbols scratched near her body matched ancient marks found in forgotten London tunnels, marks meant to bind something that feeds on despair and forgotten souls. Eleanor, caught between two worlds of lies and survival, had become the perfect vessel. The man in the peaked cap was never found because he was never fully human. He was the face the entity wore to lure the desperate. The real killer moved between them, a presence that had haunted the East End long before 1888, using violence and fear as ritual. Eleanor's double life had unknowingly fed it. Every lie to her father, every night on the streets, every small moment of false hope, like that black hat, strengthened the shadow's hold. Even now, on cold February nights, people report seeing a woman with one eye twitching, standing under railway arches across London. If you look too long, she smiles and offers to walk with you. The file was closed, the horror was not. Some nights in the lodging houses of the old districts, the fires still die without reason. Symbols appear on walls, and somewhere in the darkness calm footsteps approach, unhurried, eternal, patient. Eleanor Voss was never just a victim. She was the warning. And the shadow is still hungry.